month. For perspective on where it's headed next and the global currency market, we're joined by Adam Button. He's Chief Currency Analyst at Forex Live. Adam, good to have you here. And it was interesting, as you just heard, we were talking about commodities, how there's a bit of softness in commodity prices lately. Normally, when you see that, the Canadian loonie tends to also soften, but that is not the case. Tell me what's happening here. Why are we seeing this counterintuitive pattern?
Right. The Canadian dollar has done a lot better than some of the traditional drivers would say. I mean, oil's off. There's this feeling that commodities are pretty strong, but Canada's a poor place to invest because of regulation and so on. But you have, many commodities down. Lumber's down 45% from the highs. You have base metals down. Precious metals have been down for a long time. And even Canadian oil is now at a $31 discount, which is the widest since 2013. So at the same time, there's better investment coming into Canada than we had thought there would be. The Bank of Canada talked about this a month ago, and it really came out of left field. But you're starting to see more talk of this, some of it in LNG. And if that were to really come together, then you have a pretty good case for some Canadian dollar strength, especially if someone can draw a line under commodities, if we can get some better rhetoric on global trade.
And when you mention LNG, I presume you're referring to projects out on the West Coast that might open up markets in Asia?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a fiasco. Canada was really the first to the table for LNG. We have very competitively priced natural gas, which is also at a discount to the U.S. America had banned exports. Canada had an enormous head start and has continued to fumble it on environmental concerns and just an inability to get the money invested to get these projects moving. But now there seems to be a little bit of a thawing in the investment climate there, as some investors in Canada realize that America is going to gobble up this market if we don't start to move soon.
Let's talk about monetary policy. What are you expecting from the Bank of Canada, given the economic data that we've seen lately?
Yeah, it's been strong. If you look at the past month or so of data, that's really what's boosted the Canadian dollar. Sometimes you get flows, sometimes you get speculation, different stories moving through the market. But in Canada, it's really been about data. You had strong inflation numbers, strong retail sales numbers, and this week GDP was very strong. So you have had this sustainable kind of rally, and if those numbers continue, the Bank of Canada is going to hike. Now, the problem with the Bank of Canada is you really never know what they're going to do until they do it. You don't have any kind of confidence in what's coming a year or two out, so you're playing it kind of one data release at a time. But right now it's very strong. You have a strong neighbor to the south, and if we can sort out NAFTA, it can all come together very quickly for the Canadian dollar.
Okay, let's take a quick trip around the world. I want to go to Great Britain because it's interesting to note that the sterling is at a 7-month low against the loonie today. What's your outlook for the pound, given the Bank of England decision and the future of Brexit?
Right. The Bank of England hiked rates today. Normally that's a good thing for a currency, but it came along with some rhetoric from Mark Carney saying we're probably only going to hike rates one time a year for the foreseeable future. And the market looks at that and then looks at the Brexit risks and says, you know what, you might be cutting rates if Brexit goes badly. And the best case scenario, you're hardly hiking rates at all. So there isn't a lot to chew on here. And if you compare it to somewhere like Canada, where there is potentially a lot more upside, you just have this incredible uncertainty over Brexit. You could say the same thing about NAFTA, but it's just not at the same level. It's a fiasco politically. Theresa May really seems to have no allies, and the sterling just can't get off the floor. It's tried to, rally a few times in the last few months, but inevitably there's political disarray and it gets beaten right back down. And it's increasingly looking like there's nothing that's going to sustain any kind of pound rally.
And what about China? Obviously, the rhetoric has really ratcheted up between the U.S. and China on trade. We're seeing that reflected in the Chinese equity markets and, of course, the yuan. Talk me through that.
Yeah, well, you have this divergence. The Chinese equity market is down 20+% this year. It's down 4% this week since the announcement about 25% tariffs. Whereas the American stock market is doing fine. And, both these markets can't really be right. If these tariffs come to pass, the American market has to come down or the Chinese market has to come up. So ultimately, somebody is going to be wrong here. And I think Canadian investors have to think about, okay, let's say a NAFTA deal gets done, and then you have more of a Chinese trade war with the US. So where does that leave Canada in the middle? It's a tough spot because you would get more orders from America, and it might be better for the real economy, but financial markets are going to be blasted all over the place. Ultimately, I think the Canadian economy does a little better, but that would probably hurt the Canadian dollar, at least in the short term.
And so in the few seconds we have left, where are you placing your bets? Who's right, the U.S. equity markets or the Chinese equity markets and the currencies?
Right. I think ultimately there's a good story to tell in Canada. We're tied to the U.S. NAFTA is probably going to get done. The market's scared to bet on a NAFTA deal because it doesn't trust Trump, but I think the signals are good this time. I think we're going to get a deal, and the Canadian dollar will get to 80 cents.
All right, traders, place your bets now. Adam Button is Chief Currency Analyst at Forex Live. Thanks for being here.